Armed conflict around the world has been rising. According to the Peace Research Institute of Oslo in Norway, 2023 witnessed 59 state-based conflicts involving 34 different countries, the highest number of conflicts since the end of the Second World War. Last year also saw an additional 75 conflicts involving non-state actors. The ongoing wars in Gaza and in Ukraine exemplify the terrible toll that modern warfare can take on vital water resources and infrastructure, depriving millions of civilians of access to safe water and sanitation. Long-standing international treaties establish strict protections for essential water systems in wartime. How could the world's water resources be better protected from such risks? International law may provide one potential answer. Long-standing international treaties establish strict protections for essential water systems in wartime. In addition to enforcing legal prohibitions, many stakeholders see increasing possibilities for using innovations in water resource monitoring and data to empower preventive early warning systems. This would enable policymakers to identify emerging challenges and intervene before conflicts erupt. I'm David Michel, Senior Fellow for Water Security with the Global Food and Water Security Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. You're listening to a 6-part podcast exploring the dynamics of water conflict and the possibilities of water cooperation. This is Hidden Depths. When Russian troops destroyed the Kovka Dam on Ukraine's Dnipro River in June 2023, the resulting flooding threatened drinking water supplies for some 700,000 people. In Gaza, by the summer of 2024, Israeli military operations had destroyed every wastewater treatment plant in the territory, according to the NGO Oxfam, and water production in the Strip had fallen more than 80% from pre-war levels. Such destruction stands in stark contrast to long-standing legal norms and international treaty law, such as the Geneva Conventions and their additional protocols, protecting civilian infrastructure during armed conflict.
In the specific case of armed conflict, international humanitarian law is the legal framework which applies during armed conflicts. We have in international law what we call the treaty law, so basically the Geneva Conventions and the additional protocols to the Geneva Convention. Then we have the customary international humanitarian law, the principles of customary international humanitarian law, so that it applies even if the parties to an armed conflict have not ratified the additional protocols.
Mara Tignino is senior lecturer in the Faculty of Law at the University of Geneva. Tignino explains how different legal instruments and norms apply different prohibitions and protections to water in time of war.
We distinguish the different typologies of water. So, for example, when we talk about water supplies or irrigation works, this will be protected under the category of object indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. We also use increasingly instruments of human rights law. So in many resolutions, for example, of the Security Council or the Human Rights Council, you have together norms of international humanitarian law and human rights law that are used. And then we have a third category that is also related to water, that is the natural environment. So also in this case, international humanitarian law provides norms addressing this type of damage and attacks against the natural environment. So in addition to international humanitarian law, and then we have also another important instrument are the military manuals. So the domestication, we can say, of international law at the national level.
Some conflicts pit states against each other. Other conflicts embroil non-state groups. Tignino highlights that international law brings different tools to bear on different types of actors.
In international law, we distinguish between state responsibility and individual criminal responsibility. So state responsibility, it is like, for example, there are cases before the International Court of Justice between Ukraine and Russia. So in this case, the state responsibility is engaged, but we have also the individual criminal responsibility. And in this case, it is International Criminal Court that can judge this case of crimes. And so the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court is over war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and the crime of aggression.
Russia's war on Ukraine, for example, and the deliberate targeting of water infrastructure, such as the Kakhovka Dam, raise several questions for international law. The Geneva Conventions and additional protocols protect civilian infrastructure that contain what the legal language calls dangerous forces, such as dams that hold back floodwaters or nuclear plants that contain nuclear reactors. Other elements of international law prohibit extensive destruction of the natural environment. The ecological catastrophe resulting from the demolition of the Kakhovka Dam could fall into this category.
In this case, we can make reference to the additional protocol on the law that is applicable on international armed conflict. So both Ukraine and Russia are parties to this protocol. So in this case, we have Article 56 of the first additional protocol that cover the attacks against installations containing dangerous forces such as dams and dikes. And the condition, it is the water that comes from the destruction of dams has an impact on the civilians. And also I would raise the issue of the ecocide. The ecocide, it is a destruction of the of natural environment, of the environment. So this would be also another avenue to be used to examine the case of the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam in Ukraine.
Many more conflicts, however, involve so-called non-state actors, such as insurgent groups, separatist movements, and violent extremists, like those we discussed in our previous episode. These groups, too, have targeted water infrastructure or sought to weaponize water resources in the course of conflict in ways that violate international laws and norms.
International humanitarian law under the second additional protocol on non-international armed conflict really is related to the case of non-state armed groups. So, international humanitarian law also contains provisions that are addressed to this category of actors. Several resolutions of the Security Council, I would like to mention Resolution 2573 and 2417. They refer to violations committed by all parties to the armed conflict. It includes both states and non-state armed groups. And these resolutions that I mentioned, they refer specifically on attacks against essential services and the civilian infrastructure. So they cover both water and energy infrastructure.
Legal instruments structuring specific protections for water systems and water resources during armed conflict are not lacking. In practice, however, these tools have rarely been exercised in courts of law.
The international level, we don't have really no explicit cases. I can mention a case brought to the International Court of Justice between Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, where at the beginning of the case it was mentioned the control over a dam that was providing water to the city of Kinshasa. But then the lawyers of the team of the Democratic Republic of Congo decided not to continue on the arguments about the violation of the protection of dams, because in this case there was not the direct impact on the population.
Tignino emphasizes, though, that international law is far from the only body of rules and norms regulating the conduct of armed conflict. The doctrines and practices of militaries also play a significant role in shaping the impacts of armed hostilities on water systems and infrastructure.
The U.S. military manual that was recently updated and is publicly available. For example, even if the U.S. they are not parties to the first additional protocol, they take the provision of the Article 54 of the first additional protocol on the protection of objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population. So they consider the article part of the norms regulating the conduct of hostilities, but they delimitate the scope of application, saying that only the attacks against objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population are prohibited only if the attack are the intention to deprive the population of access, for example, to water supplies. Some conversations with militaries, what I have noticed it is that there is an opening of militaries also to consider other areas of international law, in particular, for example, international environmental law. The International Committee of the Red Cross is developing increasingly a practice on the protection of the environment, in particular the ICRC guidelines on the protection of the natural environment, where there are several recommendations and also mention of good practices by armed forces.
Militaries, policymakers, and international law have often struggled to protect water resources from the ravages of armed conflict, much less hold accountable the combatants who have weaponized water during war. Yet the global community has increasingly recognized the potential perils that water-related conflicts may pose to peace and prosperity. The realization of these risks is spurring efforts to better understand and assess the drivers and possible trajectories of evolving pressures on global water supplies. Charlie Iceland is the director of freshwater initiatives at the World Resources Institute, known as WRI, headquartered in Washington, D.C. WRI uses publicly available data to create an analysis and visualization platform called Aqueduct that enables users to identify and evaluate water risks worldwide.
We have a number of different global water risk indicators that essentially try to assess if there's too little water, too much water, or if the water is too dirty. Our most commonly used metric is called water stress, and that just measures for any given place in the world how much of that location's water is being used for agriculture, for industry, or for municipal use. We have a couple of groundwater risk indicators that measure whether or not we're using too much of our groundwater in any given location. We have a couple of indicators of flood risk, and then we have a couple of measures of water pollution, namely nutrient pollution, which is the result of fertilizer being used on farms or nitrogen deposition from, say, automobile or factory operations. And then we have a measure of how much of a city's sewage is being treated.
Aqueduct allows users to drill down to examine strains on water resources in specific countries, regions, or localities. Scenario analysis tools can also be applied to map the impacts of various drivers on future water stress, projected out to the year 2050 or 2080.
The places where we're seeing high water stress today are going to get progressively more stressed, either because population is still growing and or because the economy is growing and society's using more water there. On the supply side, we see some areas of specifically the mid-latitudes of the southern hemisphere are getting more stressed because of the effects of climate change.
Tools like the Aqueduct platform can give those in decision-making positions deeper insights into trends of water-related conflict to help protect global water resources. The United Nations, in its 2024 World Water Development Report, judges that frictions over shared water resources are exacerbating conflicts worldwide. Likewise, the United States intelligence community considers that water challenges, combined with poverty, social tensions, and weak institutions, could fuel instability and insecurity in many regions. Improving information about the rising stresses and demands on shared water supplies can help empower policymakers to better protect water resources internationally. The Aqueduct platform, beyond establishing a starting block to collect new and relevant water data, also provides the foundation for WRI's dedicated Water, Peace, and Security Global Early Warning Tool. By layering hydrological data with additional socioeconomic, political, and other indicators, the tool facilitates further analysis examining how water stresses could combine with other factors to generate potential conflict risks.
A few of the indicators that we use are water-related variables. Some relate to food and food security. And then some of the more commonly used variables to predict conflict include demographic variables, economic variables, the fact of whether there's conflict existing already in that geography or not. That's a very important predictor of future conflict. But we use machine learning and big data sets to try to predict violent conflict. One of the models looks out 2 months into the future, and the other looks 12 months out into the future. And we're predicting violent conflict at local or subnational levels, the state or provincial level, so one level below national level.
WRI has found that the current version of the early warning tool successfully forecasts a high percentage of future conflicts that do subsequently emerge. But this capacity also delivers a very significant number of false positives, predicting the outbreak of conflicts that do not in fact occur.
So for our longer-term outlook, the 12-month outlook, we're able to capture over 80% of the conflicts that do take place. But that's at the cost of over-predicting conflicts. So, for example, for new conflicts, for every 5 conflicts that we predict, only 1 is correct. If you do see potential conflict happening according to these models, you would then want to dig deeper, do more desk research to try to verify whether there is or is not, in fact, a conflict that's taking place or likely to take place.
On its own, the Water, Peace, and Security Early Warning Tool is only one element of WRI's engagement with decision makers and stakeholders to help identify and mitigate potential water-related conflict risks.
What we're finding is that simply putting the tool out there is not enough. To get it used more effectively, you really got to take some time and work with decision makers in those locations. It's also very important for those governments that they be using their own data, because that makes the resulting data analyses legitimate in their eyes.
With support from the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, WRI has partnered with a number of other organizations to complement the early warning tool by initiatives providing countries and communities with capacity building and dialogue support, helping decision makers to better understand potential conflict risks and take early action, reducing possible flashpoints.
There are a number of global actors in the defense, diplomacy, and development communities that are interested in learning more about how climate change and natural resource scarcity may be driving conflict and migration or political destabilization more generally. We've been working in Mali for, I think, at least 5 years now. We've been in Iraq for several years. We've been in Kenya working for 2 or 3 years. And so we've started working with decision makers and with local communities to start to figure out what are the real local causes of the conflict. To what extent are water and other natural resource issues involved?
The answers to those questions are complex and depend on specific contexts in each country and community. But Iceland finds that one risk factor in particular stands out across many water-related conflicts.
I think one of the main factors behind conflict is a breakdown in governance structures, a failure of governance structures. So whether that's in a place like sub-Saharan Africa and the incidence of violent conflict over water stress, or whether it's in the United States where states are unable to agree on how to divvy up the water and they go to court with each other rather than resolve it amicably through negotiation. There are places where insufficient dialogue's taking place. There are places where no dialogue is taking place. Those breakdowns in governance are the main fuel behind water conflicts. How you divvy up your water is a political issue. And to resolve it, you need to resolve it through dialogue and discussion.
Dialogue and discussion are crucial elements to effective conflict prevention and resolution. Yet mounting strains on global water resources are raising increasing challenges for cooperative water governance. Many shared water supplies lack shared mechanisms and collective relationships to forge collaboration among contending water users. In our next episode, we explore how water diplomacy and peace-building strategies can help water users and stakeholders to build the cooperative structures and processes needed to manage shared water resources. I'm David Michel with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Join us next time for our final episode. This has been Hidden Depths. Hidden Depths is an initiative of the Project on Water Security, part of the CSIS Global Food and Water Security Program. Thank you to our guests, Charlie Iceland, Director of Freshwater Initiatives at the World Resources Institute, and Mara Tignino, Senior Lecturer in the Faculty of Law at the University of Geneva. Hidden Depths is produced by Sarah Baker, edited with Emma Dodd, and narrated by David Michel.